Headlines on RT International. The Pentagon reveals American troops could already be engaged in the fight in the Iraqi city of Mosul and will stay there, quote, for a while, despite previous claims. Western media left red-faced after ridiculing Donald Trump's comments on Sweden's migration problems, as violent clashes erupt in a mostly migrant neighbourhood in Stockholm. And French presidential hopeful Emmanuel Macron backs up his claims of Russian hacking as he meets Britain's Prime Minister in London.
Do you have any evidence that Russian hackers are hacking your emails?
No, I don't. I mean, we have evidence of attacks coming from Ukraine and Russia.
And will you release it? Will you release it?
Okay.
Will you release the evidence?
Your Wednesday headlines live from Moscow. Thanks for joining us. This is RT International. The Pentagon has revealed that U.S. military advisors in Iraq could already be engaged in the fight in the Iraqi city of Mosul. We'll show you some of the latest pictures from that embattled area. Iraqi forces reportedly advancing towards the western part of the city. However, it turns out that the U.S. forces on the ground could be more involved in the fight than Washington originally claimed. Here's what Defense Secretary Mattis said about the latest stage of the operation.
The West Mosul operation, as you know, has been underway in terms of isolating the area for some time now. We are very close to it, if not already engaged in that fight.
The Defense Secretary added that the anti-ISIL fight will last, quote, for a while. In Washington, Guy and Chichikan now looking at just how involved U.S. troops are in Iraq this time around.
Sending troops to fight overseas can be politically costly. On how to minimize a potential blowback, the Obama administration may have taught its successor a lesson or two. With thousands of U.S. troops deployed in Iraq to defeat ISIL, the Ford administration maintained they were there to advise and assist, not to fight.
American forces will not be returning to combat in Iraq. We will not be sending U.S. troops back into combat in Iraq. I want to be clear. The American forces that have been deployed to Iraq do not and will not have a combat mission. They will support Iraqi forces on the ground.
When a member of Special Forces, Joshua Wheeler, was killed during a hostage rescue mission, the spokesman for the U.S. anti-ISIL operation admitted.
Sergeant Wheeler died in combat. Let's be very clear about that. He was killed in action. He died during a combat operation. So that's what this is.
His boss at the time was quick to correct.
It doesn't represent us assuming a combat role. It represents a continuation of our advise and assist mission.
As journalists published images of U.S. servicemen at the front line near Mosul in Iraq, officials said more of the same.
We're executing the Iraqi plan, and the Iraqi plan is that the only ones going in there right now, there is no plan for coalition forces to go in there, and the Iraqis have said it's just going to be their forces.
Fast forward 4 months, and under the Trump administration, the U.S. military confirms deeper involvement in Iraq, but still refers to the troops there as advisors.
It is true that we're operating closer and deeper into the Iraqi formation, so we adjusted our posture during the East Mosul fight.
As Iraqi forces are trying to drive ISIL out of the western part of Mosul, the new Defense Secretary, General James Mattis, says the role of the American troops there hasn't changed.
The U.S. forces continue in the same role that they were in East Mosul.
Role defined by the previous administration as non-combat.
What we had going on before was, putting lipstick on a pig and calling it a runway model for Victoria's Secret. It wasn't just advise and assist. They were putting special operations troops that are equipped for combat, and they were doing more than, offering advice on how to carry a backpack or how to shoot a rifle. They were actually exposed to combat, but refused to admit it. The point of naming it that has more to do with the politics in America as opposed to being an accurate description of what's going on. You can politically get away with telling the American people that, yes, we're just sending military forces there in order to train and assist these troops, but you don't talk about actually what does that entail.
So far, it seems the U.S. military under the Trump administration has operated with the same definitions as the previous one. The question is whether they match the reality on the ground. In Washington, I'm Ganesh Chakyan, RT.
Former British intelligence officer Emmanuel Macron says Washington could face consequences if it decides to involve troops in closer combat on the ground.
Might indeed be blowback. I mean, they've gone into Iraq how many times now? 3, 4? I lose count. And every time they then do have to withdraw, and chaos seems to follow in that wake. And of course, even the rise of ISIS itself came about because the Americans did indeed withdraw under Obama from Iraq. If there are indeed American deaths, even before President Trump has actually authorized formal increased involvement in Mosul, I think also that West Mosul is going to be an incredibly difficult nut to crack because it's a very ancient city, lots of small alleys, the armored vehicles can't go down these very narrow alleys, so it's very much going to be hand-to-hand urban fighting all the way through. And of course, there is a possibility that even though there are only about 2,000, I think, estimated ISIS fighters within this very large part of Mosul, that there will be booby traps, there will be collateral damage, there will be civilian deaths.
Well, previously, when asked about similar involvement of U.S. troops in Syria, here's what Washington said.
And there was never this, there was never this no boots on the ground. I don't know where this keeps coming from.
I will not put American boots on the ground in Syria. We should not be drawn once more into a long and costly ground war. It will not involve American combat troops fighting on foreign soil. The resolution we've submitted today does not call for the deployment of U.S. ground combat forces to Iraq or Syria.
I'm just curious if this is like part of some kind of devious grand strategy to say one thing and then do the complete opposite of it.
I mean, there's no point in arguing the boots on the ground rhetoric. It's absolutely no point in it. I'm not disputing the fact that we have troops on the ground and they're wearing boots.
Well, these servicemen were photographed on Syrian soil last May. Images surfaced online allegedly showing U.S. soldiers fighting alongside Kurdish YPG forces in Raqqa.
Let me tell you something. I'm from the United States of America, and I say kill them all.
But they're not alone in their fight. People are volunteering to come here, leaving our jobs behind, leaving our families behind to come and help. I love the YPG. I love my YPG brothers, my YPGA sisters.
And more troops could be deployed in the region if the military involvement in Mosul works out. That's according to Middle East journalist Martin Jay.
In terms of involvement and actually getting boots on the ground, we've got people now on the front line who possibly could be fired at. So I think that's one thing that we need to take into account. All eyes are on Mosul, but also you've got to take into account that the second initiative, which is also getting underway, is Raqqa in northeastern Syria. But you might see more American soldiers involved in the Syria offensive. If the Mosul one in Iraq goes well, that could also almost be a template for the future.
With the fighting only expected to intensify in Mosul, human rights organizations are raising the alarm over the continuing humanitarian catastrophe in that region.
We estimate right now that there are between 750,000 and 800,000 civilians who are in Western Mosul. We're deeply concerned about the risks that they're facing. We're concerned that they may be used by ISIL, by Daesh as human shields. We know that if they try to escape, Daesh is likely to target them. We're worried that families could step on booby traps. The situation is dramatic. When the fighting reaches neighborhoods, the families that are living there are going to be at extreme risk.
It's been a very serious situation for the civilians within Mosul itself. Right now their sort of supply lines are cut, so it's deteriorating quite significantly in terms of humanitarian needs. Even with the civilians that are fleeing from Mosul, they're in a very desperate state. They're having to cross front lines, and they're coming with nothing but the clothes on their back. So it is sort of urgent humanitarian need when we see this displacement coming from Mosul.